Why didn't the United States and the Soviet Union just fight each other directly during the Cold War? Why all these indirect battles and proxy wars? The simple answer comes down to three words: mutually assured destruction. Let me explain. In the 1940s, the US and the USSR were the two main superpowers. They had massive influence over the world, but they also had something else in common: nuclear weapons. In fact, both countries had the power to destroy each other and much more. The US first developed nuclear weapons during World War II, with help from the UK and Canada in a secret project known as the Manhattan Project. In 1945, the US dropped atomic bombs on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, showing the world just how destructive these weapons could be. When the Soviet Union saw this, they quickly ramped up their own nuclear research. By 1949, they successfully tested their own atomic bomb. At this point, both countries had nuclear weapons, and any direct conflict between them could easily lead to World War III. But this wouldn't just be bad for the US and the Soviet Union. It would be disastrous for the entire planet. A nuclear war could have wiped out human civilization. So instead of fighting each other head-on, both sides realized that a direct war would be too dangerous to even consider. Even Joseph Stalin, the leader of the Soviet Union, understood this risk. As much as he was known for being tough and ruthless, he was also wise enough to avoid a direct war with the US. Sometimes, giving credit where it's due is important. Now, let's go back to the Korean War. By September 1950, the situation was looking grim for South Korea. North Korean forces had pushed the South to the edge of the Pusan perimeter, and it seemed like a communist victory was inevitable. But General Douglas MacArthur of the United States had a plan. Instead of trying to break through North Korean defenses on the ground, he used the US Navy to attack the North from the sea. This surprise move allowed the UN forces to retake Seoul and disrupt the North Korean supply lines. Within a few months, the tide of war had turned, and South Korea was on the verge of winning. However, just as the UN forces were gaining ground, China entered the conflict. Chinese troops crossed the border into North Korea and pushed the UN forces back below the 38th parallel. From there, control of the Korean peninsula kept shifting, back and forth, with the line of control constantly moving around the 38th parallel. Eventually, in 1953, the two sides signed an armistice agreement, which created a de facto border between North and South Korea. It's important to note that an armistice is not a peace treaty. Technically, North and South Korea are still at war to this day. After the armistice, both countries built up fortifications along the border to prevent each other from crossing. The result is the Demilitarized Zone, DMZ, a 4-kilometer-wide strip of land that separates the two countries. Ironically, this demilitarized zone is one of the most heavily fortified borders in the world. Speaking of ironies, the official name of North Korea is the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. It's a bit of a joke, because North Korea is often ranked as one of the least democratic countries in the world. But hey, no one from North Korea is likely to watch this video, so I'm safe to say that in 1991, both North and South Korea joined the United Nations, but despite this, neither country recognizes the other as legitimate. Each one believes it is the rightful government of all of Korea. The only place where the leaders of both countries meet is inside the DMZ, at a location called the Joint Security Area, JSA. This is a very unique place because it sits right on the border, which isn't actually a formal border but an armistice line. In fact, the armistice line runs through the conference table where the two leaders meet. There are doors on either side of the table, and each leader enters and exits through their own country's door, without crossing into the other's side. Today, North and South Korea are completely different from each other in nearly every way. Both countries speak Korean, and both have Korea in their official names, but that's where the similarities end. South Korea has a thriving, free market economy, while North Korea is officially a socialist republic, but it is really a totalitarian dictatorship. The government controls almost every aspect of life, and the country is ruled by the Kim family, with Kim Jong-un, the grandson of the country's founder, in charge today. So, if you're thinking of visiting Korea, you'll probably want to stick to South Korea. It's democratic, economically prosperous, and a much safer place to visit. North Korea, on the other hand, is a very different story. While both countries share a history, they are now worlds apart in terms of politics, society, and daily life. Have you ever wondered why countries can't just print more money to solve big problems like debt, homelessness, or unemployment? At first glance, it might sound like an easy fix. After all, wouldn't printing more money solve some of these issues? But the reality is a bit more complicated, and it comes down to one important word: inflation. Inflation is when the prices of goods and services rise over time, which means the money you have buys less than it used to. It's caused by an increase in the amount of money in an economy, and the more money there is, the less valuable it becomes. But before we dive deeper into how this works, let's first figure out exactly what money is. You might think it's obvious, but money has no intrinsic value. This means money doesn't have any real value on its own. It's not valuable because of the material it's made from, but because people agree that it is. For example, if you were stranded on a desert island, a dollar bill would be totally useless to you. You can't eat it, wear it, or use it for anything. Money only works because we trust it. This is known as the Tinkerbell effect, a term I learned from a YouTube channel called Vsauce. The idea is that something exists only because we believe in it. In other words, money only has value because we all agree that it does. Now, this wasn't always the case. In the past, people used what we called commodity money. This is money that has real value because it's made from something useful. For example, people used to trade things like salt, spices, horses, or even weapons. Precious metals like gold and silver were also used as money. And although these metals don't have any intrinsic value, they were rare and in demand, which made them valuable. Gold and silver coins became a form of money because they were valuable in themselves. Over time, carrying around gold or silver wasn't always practical, so the world moved to something called representative money. This is where you could deposit your gold in a bank, and the bank would give you a piece of paper saying that you owned that gold. You could then use the paper to buy things, and if you wanted, you could go back to the bank and exchange it for your gold. This made things much simpler than hauling around precious metals. Eventually, the world shifted to a system called fiat money, which is what we use today. Fiat money doesn't have any value in itself. It only has value because the government says it does. You trust the government to back up its money with the promise that it will be accepted for goods and services. This system works as long as everyone has faith that the government will manage the economy well and keep inflation under control. Take the United States as an example. In just over 200 years, the country has used all three types of money systems. When the U.S. was founded, it used a mix of gold, silver, and copper coins, which were considered commodity money because they were made from valuable metals. In 1792, the U.S. introduced the U.S. dollar with the Coinage Act of 1792, and these coins had a value equal to the metal they were made from. In 1900, the U.S. adopted the gold standard, a form of representative money. This meant that people could exchange their paper money for gold at any time. This system helped countries set clear exchange rates between currencies. For example, if 1 gram of gold was worth a peyote in Britain and $1.50 in America, then it was easy to figure out that peyote equals $1.50. In 1971, the U.S. abandoned the gold standard entirely under President Richard Nixon. From that point on, the U.S. dollar and most of the world's currencies became fiat money. This means the value of money no longer depends on anything tangible, like gold, but on the government's ability to maintain its value. So now that we understand what money is and how it works, let's return to the question: why can't countries just print more money to fix their problems? The short answer is that printing more money leads to inflation. Economics 101 tells us that when the supply of something increases, its value usually goes down. So, if a government prints more money without increasing the amount of goods and services in the economy, each unit of money becomes less valuable. This means that prices will rise because there's more money chasing the same amount of goods. So if the government printed $1 million and gave it to everyone in the country, people would suddenly have more money to spend. But since the number of things to buy hasn't changed, the demand for products would increase, and so would their prices. In the end, the value of the money would decrease, and people would not be able to buy as much as they could before. Let's look at an example to make it clearer. Imagine the government printed $1 million and sent it to every person in the country. Everyone now has more money, so they all go out and try to buy a sports car. But there's only a limited number of sports cars available. Because so many people now want one, the price of the cars would skyrocket. The same thing would happen for all goods and services in the economy. This means the value of your money drops because it can't buy as much anymore. This is the reason why simply printing more money isn't a solution to debt, unemployment, or other problems. If it were that easy, everyone would just print more money, but it would only make the problem worse. Inflation would spiral out of control, and people would find that the money they have isn't worth as much as it was before. The key takeaway here is that money only works if its value is maintained. If governments print too much, they risk causing inflation, which can lead to serious economic problems. This is why countries can't simply print more money to solve their issues, and why managing inflation is so important for a stable economy.